Hi everybody, today we're working on a 1995 Volkswagen Jetta. This car has a bad tie rod. It was unable to get an alignment. The shop refused to do the alignment because the parts were so worn. This car's pretty worn out, pretty beat up, but it still gets the driver from point A to point B, so let's go ahead and fix it. And hey, fixing it's cheaper than a car payment. I've posted links in the description to the tools and the parts we're using for this job. The part is actually moving when I pull on the strut and on the tie rod here, so these parts are definitely worn out. The tie rod and ball joint bolt, this is a 19mm. After removing, I thread the nut back on just a little bit so that when we hit it with a giant hammer, the ball joint doesn't go flying. Next, I'll remove the fastening nut here, the adjustment nut. This is a 22mm nut. This will allow us to get the ball joint off at the end. And when we do that, we'll actually count how many times we turn it as we remove it. And this will allow us to get the alignment close to what it was with the old tie rods after we replace the part. Okay, so now I'll count how many times I have to turn it until this part comes loose from the inner tie rod. And that looks like a total of 19.5 turns. And we'll repeat on the other side, 19mm bolt to get off the ball joint nut here. That was the easy part. Now comes the fun part. We first need to remove the clamps so that we can get the boot off. The outer clamp is pretty easy. You just use a pair of pliers or hose clamps and pull it off. The inner clamp is a bit more challenging. This is a CV boot type clamp, and you need to use a screwdriver to bend the clip to loosen it up. Once you've done that, you can start tugging the boot off, but it's on there pretty tight, and it has a fastening dowel that prevents you from rotating it as you remove it. So you might need a little bit of prying action on the back side here to force it off of the end of the steering rack. Now you can just pull it off of the arm here, but before doing that you need to get the nut and the clamp out of the way. Hold on to these boots. They're probably not going to be included with the new tie rods that you buy. This old inner tie rod is pretty loose. I'll be using a tie rod removal tool, and I can't imagine doing the job without this tool, so if you're going to tackle this yourself, I'd highly recommend that you purchase this tool. It comes with a set of kind of like crow's feet here that go around the ends of the inner tie rod. So you'll need to sort through and figure out which one fits the best. For this car, it looks like it was the 1 1/4 inch part is the one that fit the best. So you'll need to take the kind of the crow's foot part of the tool, fit it over the inner tie rod, over the machine surface there. Then slide the tube over the tie rod until it mates up with the part that you already installed at the back end of the tie rod. It's a little bit tricky with this tool. These tie rods are just a little bit too long. That there's actually a retaining clip on the inside end of the tool there, but the length of the tie rod makes it impossible to close the retaining clip. So what I ended up having to do is reach one of my hands in there and kind of hold it in place, because when you push on the tool, it has the effect of trying to push off the crow's foot piece from the inside of the tie rod. So I have to kind of hold that in place while at the same time cracking the nut. I tried to use an impact gun. It did work on one side, but on the other side, the impact gun didn't do the job, and I ended up having to use a 1/2 inch socket with a breaker bar and a long handle. I think probably the length of the tube is causing a reduction in the torque. And be sure to compare parts before reinstalling. Make sure that the lengths are the same. And also compare the ball joints themselves to make sure that you're installing the left part on the left side and the right part on the right side. The curve is different on the left and the right. Both left and right parts use standard clockwise threads. Use the same tool to install the new tie rods that you use to uninstall the old ones. You want to make this about as tight as you can possibly get it, and it doesn't hurt to use a bit of thread locker glue as well. I'm going to put a bit of silicone spray on the boot here to help it to slide on. Pay attention to the orientation of the hole here, which lines up with the locator dowel, which is kind of at the bottom rear on the steering rack. I was able to save one of the boot clamps using the CV clamp tool, but it's really awkward. I think probably you can get by with just replacing the clamps with an appropriately sized hose clamp. There's a hole right through the control arm, which is really convenient for tightening up a hose clamp here on the outside end of the boot. Leave the clamp just a bit loose so that if you have to adjust the tie rod, that it doesn't cause the boot to be twisted around as you rotate the tie rod. Don't forget to put the nut back on before putting on the outer ball joint. Now we'll put the outer ball joint back on, and we'll rotate the necessary number of turns to set it back to the specification from when we removed it. Next, tighten the lock nut. Restore the ball joint, and then tighten the bolt. Go for a test drive and see what happens. I found that the wheel was turned a little bit. The car seemed to track a little bit off and the wheel was crooked. So I brought the car back into the shop, kind of eyeballed it, and I could see that the left tire was pointed in a little too far. So I adjusted that, and it was good enough to drive to get an alignment. After adjusting it, the steering wheel was pointed mostly straight, but of course I don't know what the toe-in settings are or anything like that. And make sure you do go get an alignment after you do this, because no matter how much you try to match the original settings, the new parts are tighter, and you're going to need to get an alignment to make sure everything's really to spec. So that's it. Thanks for watching.